Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of SuperPsyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. SuperPsyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't.
The U.S. Constitution became effective 235 years ago. It is a document that was way ahead of its time, yet the document is the same as it was in the late 1700s, and much of our world has changed since then. We can talk about what the Constitution says and debate aspects about it, but what about living daily life according to what the document says? A.J. Jacobs is a New York Times bestselling author. He is also one of the funniest, smartest, and most curious people I have ever known. Each of his books have involved stretching knowledge through experience, and I call him a stuntman, driven by his desire to learn. Instead of putting his body in danger, however, he will bring the Constitution to life by walking through the streets of Manhattan with a tricorn hat and a musket while following various aspects of the Constitution to the letter. His latest book, The Year of Living Constitutionally, one man's humble quest to follow the Constitution's original meaning, was a total delight to read. The book has received copious praise, and the words that resonated most with me came from Andy Borowitz, who said, "I don't know how I learned so much while laughing so hard." This is AJ's fifth interview on the SuperPsyched podcast, and I am so delighted to have him back. His drive for personal growth, to live according to his values, and to wave his freak flag fully is utterly inspiring to me. So listen in as AJ talks about his year of living constitutionally. AJ Jacobs, a hearty welcome back to SuperPsyched.
Sorry I'm late, and I am so excited. This is like a treat.
And to your point about being late, I would like to cite Gandalf.
Okay.
Do you remember a wizard is never late nor early, always arrives exactly when he intended to.
Oh, interesting.
So, instead of your tricorn hat, you could wear a wizard's hat.
Very wise. Yeah, well, I did not really intend to arrive 4 minutes late, but
no, but you have
I'll
wizard's
pretend
hat.
that I did.
You're freaking AJ Jacobs. You're my literally my favorite playmate of all time. Like there's nobody I would rather play with.
Yeah, I love it. Instead of going out to lunch, since we're on different coasts, we can just do a podcast.
The closest thing we got at the moment. But one of these days, either in New York or in this area, or God knows, maybe somewhere else, it has to happen. I can't imagine getting to sit with you and how cool that would be.
Well, you know, it's weird. I feel that we have, but I guess now thinking about it, we haven't. But we hung out so much, I was like, we must have met in person. But no. I'm delighted to talk today about anything you want to talk about.
Well, we're talking about your tricorn hat. That's all. That is a special of the day. And to that end, I'm going to be putting on my Ben Franklin specs. Not quite Ben Franklin, but I don't know if you recall our very first meeting. It was like this really, for me, it was like this like moment of getting to like hang out with like a hero who I'd never met, and I didn't know you would become my friend. And I was just like, holy shit, AJ Jacobs. And of course, the recording went haywire, and it was like this full like Khan. If you remember Khan from Wrath of Khan, it was like that.
But we redid it, right? Didn't we do it again?
We redid it and even made something even better. And I think it was the start of a beautiful friendship. And
there you go.
To borrow from a lot of movies, yeah, buddy. And I want to thank you again. How much do I love your foreword in my book? And the book that you read and the book that is now, you will like it even more now. It's been really, it's been shining.
I want to see it. Because I'm going to make my kids read it. And I don't think I've ever made them read another book.
My gosh.
But I think it will be very good for their mental health.
Well, then I will send you the current form. It's nearly fully polished, but
yeah, please do.
Oh, I'd love to. I'd be so honored. Well, let's get all up into it. I need to leave at the top of the hour.
Okay.
AJ Jacobs, a hearty welcome back for the fifth time to SuperPsyched.
I am so excited to be isn't in Saturday Night Live? Don't you get something?
You get a bathrobe.
Oh, okay. I'll take it. I'll give you my address after. I love coming on this show. It's like talking to a friend because I've consider you a friend. So, and I get to hear your wisdom and I get to spout off a little on my own. So it is a delight to be here.
Thank you so much. I feel the same way about you, of course, AJ. I was sharing with my wife as I was reading your book. I said, reading a book by AJ or hanging out with AJ is a lot like having the purity of being with like a 3-year-old and taking joy in a toy, paired with hanging out with the world's smartest professor. Like this, the confluence of those two seemingly unbridgeable entities, the purity of the joy of just a young, unsullied child and having the wisdom of some guy from Oxford who you're sitting back with and maybe sharing a pint and talking about really good stuff.
That is such a lovely compliment. I am going to remember that. That is great. Because I do strive for that beginner's mind. I love that whole concept. And yeah, but it is nice to pair it with a non-beginner's mind. You want to have some wisdom, hopefully, from all of the years you've been on Earth. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, I guess if we even want to be more defining of it, it's almost like the ultimate improv partner and the structure of something else. Like anyway.
Well, I do love, I love when you combine structure and flexibility. That's what when I'm writing my books, and I want to talk to you about your writing process, but mine is, I have an outline, but within the outline, I can do a lot of wiggling and jiggling and improvising.
That is really funny because I found that for my writing process, I needed to create like a bone structure around which to put the meat.
Right.
And to make it fully, like its very best. It was written, but it was written pretty well. But having my wife sit next to me and analyze every sentence, like to put, is this my voice and is this the way a reader would want to hear it? And my wife, I call her the piano tuner. She tuned the book so that it would not just make sense to me, but it would make sense to the other person.
That is a great thing to have. For my next book, I'm coming over and she's going to sit next to me. But I have the same thing. I give it to my wife and I also give it to other people. And I also try to use that beginner's mind and almost cleanse my mental palate and say, you know what? I've never heard of this book before. Let's dive in and see what it's all about and pretend that I'm reading it for the very first time. And that I do find it's a hard lesson, but I find it very helpful.
Well, the improv skill of acting as if, that is like taking the acting as if skill to like the next level.
Exactly.
Like acting as if I never saw my own words.
Exactly. I think it's a very helpful exercise.
Oh, that's so outstanding. Well, today we're going to get all up into your year of living constitutionally. Dear listener, I received a letter and I was concerned that it might be from, I don't know, some form of cold-blooded killer because it was unlike any letter I'd ever seen. It was written in a type of quill. I might add, with all due respect, maybe not the greatest hand with the quill. And I opened it up a little bit nervously. And lo and behold, it was a missive from my good friend AJ written with a feather pen, signing off at the very end, your humble servant. And it was written as if you were writing during the time of the Revolutionary War. You're a method actor. You go all in.
There you go. I love that phrase. Yeah, a method writer.
A method writer.
And this one was trying to get inside the minds of the founders to see what they thought and how we should look at the Constitution now, what we should move past, and what maybe we should revive. And part of that was I wrote the book, a lot of the book with a quill, and I wrote letters. And I'm so delighted that, I was able to send one to Adam. And I have to say, I don't think we should toss our laptops out the window. But let me just give a plug for writing with a quill. It was lovely because you are cut off from the internet. There are no pings or dings or distractions. And I do think you can think more deeply when you are writing by hand. And you don't need to write with a quill. I actually had goose quills and all of this because I was all in. But just turning off your internet or your computer, anything to get away from the distractions, we need that because I do think it changes the way we think.
Not only would I agree with that, talk about synchronicity. This morning, as I was driving to work, hands-free, I was having a conversation with the other woman in my life. Her name is Siri. And she and I have my wife and I have a great relationship. Siri and I, a lot of misunderstanding is all I can tell you. And on the daily, I get annoyed. My buddy, David Gertner, who is an engineer, said, Adam, which one of you is the more flexible party in the relationship? And maybe lean into that. I don't feel all that flexible, but I have to read, you have to be so intentional about what you write when you're writing with a quill. Here is my crappy text that I sent to my wife, because this is the opposite of a quill. I would say, hey, babe, I believe there are some black capsules on the bathroom counter. Can you bring them and put them in the waiting room? The break room. Having trouble speaking today. That would never, no founding father or founding parent of our country with a quill would write such a crappy text. It was said by Bill or Ted when they were really stoned, it sounded like. It sounded terrible. But there's so much intention that goes into stepping into an late 18th century personality. You're walking around Manhattan with a tricorn hat and a musket. Now, I have to ask you, I call you a stuntman. I know you're not necessarily, actually you do put yourself at risk, particularly when you engage in radical honesty, which is another podcast episode. But you do all kinds of wacky stunts. And I'm just trying to imagine the way I kind of was looking at it is it's like an unlikely combination of conviction, stepping fully into character, and I would have to imagine a modicum of dissociation simultaneously so that you don't take in other people's perhaps stink eye as you're walking down the street. So how do you balance those things as you're conjuring up a character who never really existed, but your image of someone who existed well over 200 years ago? And you're probably going to get some people going, oh, right on, dude. And some other people are like, what is this guy up to? That's
a great question.
How do you deal with that balance?
Well, as my son likes to say, I commit to the bit. And the idea is I've done books where I thanked 1,000 people for my cup of coffee, everyone from the farmer to the barista to the logo designer. I did one we talked about where I lived by the Bible to try to understand the Bible. So the 10 Commandments, but also growing a huge beard. And so they are crazy in some way, but also the hope is that when I go through this, I will have takeaways that will make my life better and hopefully convey to the reader to make their life better. And I have some gratitude from the Bible or from this one, these ideas of virtue or slowing down my or going deeper in my thinking with the quill pen. So part of it is I'm convinced myself, yes, I am sacrificing in the moment by looking absolutely absurd with my sons walking 50 feet in front of me and my wife
oh my God, I imagine that would be so hard for your sons and wife. It's like, how do I stand by my man at this moment? And how do I stand by my dad? I can't. We're just trying to get pancakes and he's showing up with a musket and a tricorn hat.
You are very patient. They get some good out of it. So I'll tell you later about that. But anyway, I say, look at the big picture. I'm going to do this, but out of it, hopefully will come something good, a book that will help me and help others to live a better life. So that's part of it. And just as you say, I take on a character. I'm going to say, I'm going to do this and this is my job and I'm going to see what happens. And we've also talked a lot about the puzzle mindset because my last book was about puzzles and my love of puzzles. So this is like almost a puzzle. Like, what will happen if I try to adopt this lifestyle? What's the puzzle here? What's the solution?
So funny you bring up the puzzler. I must at least multiple times weekly cite you as the people who come to see me are trying to deal with certain problems. And I bring you up and say, let's look at it like it's a puzzle. My friend AJ Jacobs said the best way to look at a problem, in particularly if it's interpersonal, is whether it's husband and wife or two heads of state, let's look at it like it's a puzzle. That changed my view of things because it becomes a collab. It makes, one of the things we know from social psychology for sure is that the best way to get two enemies to get together is to have, a shared enemy. Right. And the puzzle is, while not an enemy, it becomes the new focal point. So here you are just committing to the bit. You commit to the bit. You're walking around. Let's even take it a step further. What was the original intention of the book? How did you decide to commit to this book?
As I mentioned, I did one several years ago, which you were kind enough to talk to me about, the year of living biblically. And that one was because I grew up in a very secular home. As I said in the book, I'm Jewish, but I'm Jewish in the same way the Olive Garden is Italian. So not very, but I wanted to understand my heritage and what are the pros and cons of religion. So I went all in, as I mentioned, with the beard and the sandals. And part of that book was, what wisdom can I get from living this way? Part of it was also, how should we interpret the Bible? There are some people, some fundamentalists, you might call them, who say we've got to look at the original meaning of the Bible and follow it that way. So it says homosexuality is a sin, therefore it's a sin. Then there's others who say, no, we've got to look at the Bible and evolve the meaning to make it more in tune with today's morals. And I had always thought there was a very similar tension, a split in the way people look at the Constitution. So I'd always thought I could do a year of living constitutionally and have some of the same explorations. And then about 2 years ago, we had a originalist majority on the Supreme Court, meaning that at least 5 of the conservative justices believe that we really do have to go back to the original meaning. That is the most important part. It's had a huge impact on our lives. Some people think for good, some people think for ill, but it's affected women's health, it's affected gun policy, the environment, everything. So I said, all right, now is the time. This is the perfect time to explore how should we interpret the Constitution. And the way I like to do it is to walk the walk and talk the talk and carry the musket and eat the mutton. And so, yeah, I had a musket that I bought off ye old internet and I carried it around. And as you know, I wrote, instead of social media, I wrote pamphlets with a quill. The Third Amendment is about housing soldiers. You can provide quarters to soldiers only if you consent. So I was able to quarter a soldier for a few days, which was a nice experience. So I just went on all these adventures. I went to Congress and presented a petition in person to Congress. I applied to be a legal pirate, as is my constitutional right. And it was fascinating. And the hope was by the end of this bizarre but fascinating year that I would feel empowered because I would know more about the Constitution and what it really says and how to interpret it, and also more empowered to try to go out and help save our democracy. Because I do think whatever side you're on, you can see that it is a very divided time. And I do think we are at crux and that we really have to commit to trying to save our country. So that was the motivation for my year of living constitutionally.
Yeah, and this is too big of a question to answer in full, but what were at least just a few of the insights that you derived from stepping into the role? It's one thing to talk about it more abstractly, intellectually, but to actually step into it and become it and to feel it. What were some of those insights that you derived?
Well, there were 2 different goals of the book. One was to really dive into the sort of the crash course in the Constitution and how should we interpret that. But I think the part that might be more relevant to your show and your audience is sort of the wisdom, the lessons from living like I lived as an 18th century person. Now, of course, there are many things that we don't want to return to the 18th century. It was racist, sexist, homophobic. It was smelly. You can't believe how smelly it was.
I often think about that one, by the way. I wish I could ask or find out just what kind of smells existed. I imagine it was just disgusting.
Absolutely repulsive. Yeah. And also baths were not, that was not considered healthy. So yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So yes, we don't want to go back. But at the same time, there are parts of that mindset that I found valuable. One, we already talked about, this idea of getting away from the distractions so you can think more deeply. And that also goes for news. In the 18th century, you would get your newspaper twice a week. That was Ben Franklin's newspaper. So instead of getting a stream of negative news 16 hours a day, when you can't think, you can only react, you can only get outraged, you had it twice a week. You were able to digest it, have some distance, come up with solutions. So that, I think, is a much healthier mindset. In addition to that, the slowing down, there's the idea of virtue. I'm actually a fan of virtue in the 18th century sense, because they were obsessed with it. The word virtue appeared in the founding fathers' writings more often than the word freedom.
Wow.
And they saw virtue as self-sacrifice, thinking about the greater good, the general welfare, and thinking about the community instead of just yourself. And I love that. I am all for individual rights, of course. I mean, that is a huge part of what makes our democracy. But at the same time, I think we've forgotten about the other side, which is the responsibility to our community. They wrote the Constitution and they added the Bill of Rights. They didn't add a Bill of Responsibilities, but I think just because it was so assumed that you would be a part of your community, that you would join the bucket brigade to put out a fire, or that you're in the militia to protect your state or your country, all of these things. I don't want to join a militia, believe me. But I do love the idea of thinking about the community and others in addition to my own rights. And I will say my favorite founding father, Ben Franklin, I read his autobiography and he's like the first self-help author.
The author of Fart Proudly, by the way.
Another great book.
Hilarious.
And by the way, and not a bad idea because the thesis of Fart Proudly was that with science, it was an actual essay he wrote because he was a wit as well as a scientist. And the thesis was that we could change our diet to produce better smelling farts and make it more pleasant for everyone. Now, with gene splicing, I think you can produce like farts in any odor you want. This would be Ben Franklin's dream come true. Like lavender farts, you could do anything. Well, in addition to farts, he talked about his daily schedule, and he woke up every morning and his first thought was, what good can I do today? And I loved that. I adopted it. I wrote it in a quill pen and I put it above my desk. And not just for being saintly or anything. It's a good way for your own mental health. Say, for instance, I put up an Instagram and it doesn't get enough likes and I start to get stressed and annoyed. What's wrong with people? Then I can look at my little, what good can I do today? And I say, readjust. Is that really my North Star? How many likes I can? Is that really what I'm here on earth to do? No. And you feel better when you're trying to help others. So that is another aspect of the founding mindset that I admire.
I'm thinking about virtue as you're talking. And one of the things that we've actually determined scientifically is that there are 24 values and actions, character strengths, and virtues that come from multidisciplinary teams. And Ben Franklin's query, just kind of priming his mind every day, asking himself, what good can I do today? To your point, is bidirectional. Yes, it's very good for those around him, but it's very good for his mental health. One of the things we know about the elderly that they really understandably complain about is, I don't feel like I'm of use anymore. Mm-hmm. And what good can I do today is actually a very selfish question in certain ways. Right. I don't mean it in a bad way, but appropriately selfish. It's saying, I want to use this bag of bones and do something good.
Right.
With my limited time that is known as today.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, he was a scientist and he didn't get everything right, but I think he was onto something. And what can you just give me? I don't need all 24, but what are some of those virtues that have been elected by researchers?
You are going to laugh very hard at the two I mentioned.
Okay. I love it.
Because you and Alec Trebek are the guy.
I know what it is.
So you're right. One of them is curiosity. Another is love of learning. Another is love itself.
Oh, those are good. I can't argue with those. Those are great. And as you know, yes, you brought up Alex Trebek for those who might not have heard that episode. I interviewed Alex Trebek, the great Jeopardy host, and he had a quote. I interviewed him for a magazine. He said, I'm curious about everything, even those things that don't interest me. And I love that quote. I think about it all the time. I was thinking about it. I was listening to your Guy Kawasaki
wasn't he
interview.
Fun? Yeah.
He's great. Brilliant. But you had said, I think you had a great tip that to do something that doesn't interest you every week. I
believe that was Will Schwalbe.
Will Schwalbe. I like him. Yeah. So that's, I think, along the lines, because if you do something that you're not interested in, you might discover you are interested, because almost everything is fascinating once you start digging in.
Yeah, Will Schwalbe and you would be buddies. He does intentionally something that does not interest him once a week. Goes to a talk, goes to an event that ostensibly bores or he finds uninteresting, and will often come away saying that was amazing. That's one of the things that kind of freaks me out, by the way, about these curated playlists from, say, Spotify, which are lovely. They have an automated AI DJ based on the music you like. Here's some music. I don't think it spreads us far enough. Like my buddy Aaron and I in college, like we'd introduce each other to just really, really out there music that we would have missed. There's no way. And we used to go to the 3 for $1 bin where Rhino Records would sell these albums that nobody wanted. And sometimes they sucked. And sometimes we'd find a gem. And always our sense of music expanded.
I think that is such a crucial point. And I've heard about it talking about the daily you, or the daily me, is what some scientists have said, that the algorithms are so intent on figuring out what you like that you're missing out on that serendipity. So I do think, and someone I'm sure in Silicon Valley has already done it, but an algorithm that sends you stuff that it knows you might not like. So in addition to, here are 4 songs we know you're going to like, here's one that might annoy you, but you should listen because it'll make you a better person in the long run.
So great. And my wife, when we were kids, was not into me. And had she just decided based on that algorithm not to give me a shot in my adulthood, we might not have ended up married. So let's just say, yeah, like give stuff a chance.
Right.
Obviously, don't put yourself at risk. Don't do anything reckless. But if it's safe and if it seems like there might be some organizing principle behind it that simulates intelligence, give it a shot.
I love it. And you and I are in the same position, because my wife was very generous. She had a 3-date rule, which I don't think many people have anymore. Even if she was lukewarm on someone, she would say, I'm going to go till the 3rd date and see if I change my mind. So I was very iffy in her mind on dates 1 and 2. And finally on date 3, she was like, okay, this guy's all right. And by the way, we were talking about other virtues that I think need to be resuscitated or revitalized. And that is one that I talk a lot about in the book, which is the virtue of changing your mind, the virtue of being flexible and open-minded. And the founding fathers had many, many flaws, but the best of them, like Ben Franklin, he said in the Constitutional Convention, he said, the older I get, the less certain I am of my own opinions. And I love that humility. I also love, he told a little story parable at the convention. He said, there was this French lady, and she said to her sister, why is it? It's so curious that I am the only person I've ever met who is right on every single topic. And his point was, we're all that French lady. We all think we're right on every topic. But what are the odds of that? Infinitesimal. So realizing that you are wrong and that you can learn from evidence and reasoned talk, that you can change your mind, that is a huge thing. And I do think the founding fathers were good at that. In fact, last story, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, was on his deathbed, and his niece was there, and he made a strange face. His niece said, Uncle, what's the matter? He said, oh, nothing more than a change of mind, my dear. So he changed his mind, and then he died. He changed his mind, and we don't know what it is. It could be bicameral legislature is a bad idea, maybe, or the wallpaper. Who knows what it was? But right up until those last moments, he was thinking, you know what? I might be wrong about this. I might be wrong about that. And that, I feel, is so lacking in today's political discourse. Everyone is so intransigent and entrenched in, I am right and I'm not going to listen to any other side. And that is why we've got so much polarization.
I couldn't agree more. I don't know where I saw it, but I saw a tattoo on somebody. It said, never change who you are, which could mean something nice, but could also describe that cognitive inflexibility. I want to change who I am every day. And to bring back just a tip of the hat to Danny Kahneman, a Nobel laureate who recently passed, Adam Grant describes this man as someone who would say, I'm delighted when I find out that I'm wrong, because then I get closer to the truth.
That is
just like,
amazing.
yes, that is the right answer on the test of life. We've used that term, and you talk about it in the book. We've erroneously used the word flip-flopping, and that's a bad thing. And I think that cognitive flexibility, which is the hallmark of psychological well-being, versus there's my way and the wrong way. That's very dangerous. There's my way and the wrong way. Let's find out, because I may have some blind spots, as evidenced by the fact that my wife noticed a million of them in my book that needed to I understand what you're meaning to say, but it doesn't quite sound that way.
Right? I love that. Yeah. And I love that story about Daniel Kahneman, because imagine if our society made it a virtue that you are changing your mind towards the truth instead of punishing us. There's the phrase deep-seated beliefs. And I do have some deep-seated beliefs, but most of them are involving be kind, think about others, and try to improve the happiness of the world and relieve suffering. That's pretty much it. Everything else is shallow-seated. I'm open to changing my mind if someone presents me with, like, no, you're wrong, and here's why. Here's the evidence why. So, yeah, I think we should all celebrate shallow-seated beliefs in addition to deep-seated beliefs.
You're basically saying I have basic principles that are in and of themselves good and do not diminish others. And they only help in virtually all contexts. They are good guideposts. Everything else is negotiable. Everything else is subject to a third date, so to speak, to borrow from Julie. So you talk in the book about something that I just want the listener to know about, and that is the hedgehog and the fox. Let's talk about what those two things are and how they relate to the Constitution, and which model you tend to subscribe to more.
I think it was based on an old Greek parable, but I think the writer Isaiah Berlin made it famous. It's about two ways of looking at the world. The hedgehog has one way. He sees everything through that lens. And the fox has multiple lenses, multiple ways of seeing the world. So, for instance, a hardcore Marxist is a hedgehog because everything relates to class struggle. Whereas a fox might say, well, some of these things are about class struggle. Others are about religion. Others are about medicine. So there's multiple ways to look at history and the world. And I, as you might have guessed, am much more in the fox camp. I think it's very important to look through multiple lenses instead of only seeing something. And I do think we live, unfortunately, in a hedgehog world now.
That's right.
A lot of people see the world through a single lens. I try to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of both ways of looking at the Constitution. The one way is more originalist, focusing on original meaning, and the other way is living constitutionalism, where you evolve the meaning. And both have strengths and weaknesses. But in the end, I feel that a pluralistic, fox-like approach to deciding things is better. So you're not just looking at what was the original meaning in 1789. You are looking at how it'll affect society, how it will affect our descendants. And to bring it a little more personal and less abstract, I feel that when I make a decision in my life, I try to have a bunch of fox-like lenses. So I pay attention to my emotions, but also reason. Also, how will it affect my family? How will it affect my future? What would my ancestors think? All of these things is like a little board of directors in my mind, and they're all like arguing and saying, and then finally at the end, I come up with a decision that may or may not be wrong, but it is something that has multiple voices leading into it. It's not always, this is my one rule, and I'm only going to follow that way of looking at the world. So what are your thoughts on the fox and the hedgehog?
So I do believe that the hedgehog manner is a cognitive rigidity. And there are certain things, like killing is bad, but except for the fact that if you're doing it in self-defense, it might not be bad. And it depends on if it's real self-defense versus, I just didn't like the color of this person's skin, and therefore I felt somehow scared, and therefore... So the fox comes in and says, well, it's a very, very inconvenient answer, but a rabbi friend of mine, it's his answer to most things. And it's not satisfying, but it's the right answer. And that is, it depends. it requires the willingness to muse, the willingness to sit with, the willingness to wrestle. Some things are true. Like if I go to the deli, I pay for my meal. Except I don't pay for my meal if the guy behind the counter says, hey, it's so great to see you. And I know it's your birthday and I want to give you this cookie for free. So it depends is the answer.
That's great.
You also talk about SWA, which does not stand for Southwest Airlines, but in this case, it stands for surgery without anesthesia. Your three most dreaded words. And now we have AI and various things, various technological changes. And one of the things that I'm hearing is that as brilliant of a document as the Constitution is and was, that with changing environmental factors, it needs to evolve with us on some level. And it depends mindset. Let's talk about it. Let's think about it through various lenses and not rush to judgment, but really, really allow for thoughtful discourse and analysis. And kind of like Orville and Wilbur Wright, let's argue about the problem, but not argue about you as a person. Or Orville and Wilbur argued furiously about their project known as the airplane. And just almost poetically, they discovered that one propeller needed to go clockwise and another propeller needed to go counterclockwise for the plane to take flight. And I think that we need to have that ability to recognize that there are strengths in both models. There are certain places where the hedgehog is good, but more places, I believe, where the fox is warranted. That's my sense.
That is great. And let me dig into just two things there. First, I agree that I actually think most of the founding fathers were more fox-like. And I do think that they were so entrepreneurial and flexibly minded that they would not be as obsessed with original meaning as I think some members of the Supreme Court are. So there is an argument that originalism is not originalist. And I think there's some virtue to that. The other thing you mentioned, I love what the rabbi said. And another rabbi told me one that I always think about, which is similar, which is that most of life is not an on-off switch. It's a dimmer. So it's the same way of saying it's not black and white. There's mostly grays. But I like the dimmer analogy. And I do think, like you said, the fox is more about grays and dimming, and the hedgehog is all on-off switch. So I like dimmers in my apartment. I am actually a fan of literal dimmers, but I also like to think in a dimmer spectrum-like way.
That's so great. I love that so much. There are times when and to that point, even just acoustically, there are times when I want to crank up my music. There are times when I really want it low. It really depends. It depends is the answer.
That's
and
a great answer.
It
I
really
always, when they give those quizzes, like, do you think that marrying your cousin is wrong? Yes or no? I always want to say it depends. It depends. But a lot of the polls that you take online do not have an it depends.
That's
button.
right. And you and I are probably cousins on some level if we really get into it here on one of your other books.
Right.
But, I was just listening to a great keynote from Jensen Huang, the 17th richest man in the world, the CEO of NVIDIA, which is just a rising star, maybe the third or fourth most powerful company in the world.
I know nothing.
He was
about
talking about the fact that one of the reasons he rose to such power and his company has done so well is he has low expectations. And he said, he was delivering this at Stanford. He said, one of the problems with you all from Stanford is that you have great expectations and that makes you more brittle.
Interesting.
That it changes your mindset. And by having lesser expectations, I am more tolerant to real life that goes sideways sometimes. I'm paraphrasing what he said.
Right.
But I think that was so important. He said he wishes everyone a modicum of adversity because we need to, if you got into Stanford, for most of those students, a lot of things went right. It's very hard to get in. There are some who made it through spectacular adversity, but I would imagine that most of them crushed the SATs, went to good schools. For the most part, there, of course, are some Rocky Balboas who made it by hook or by crook in. So I'm not speaking about them, but I'm speaking about the lion's share of students. And I thought that was a very interesting perspective, and it really dovetails nicely with your idea of tolerating the dimmer and the various grades and being willingness to sit with something.
Right. I am working on that in my own life. In fact, I'm working on it in very specific ways. For instance, I always find watching a romantic comedy very stressful because I like that first act when the couple is falling in love and everything's going right. Then comes the second act when everything goes wrong. And I find myself really stressed out during the second act. So sometimes I will look at the Wikipedia spoiler plot summary and just make sure that the couple gets together at the end so that I can relax and watch the movie. But I don't think that's necessarily good for me. I think it's good to tolerate that uncertainty and build up your muscle because life is so uncertain. You've got to just enjoy, whether you enjoy the uncertainty or just tolerate it, you've got to become okay with it.
I remember just before I went to Japan as an exchange student, the external studies program had us all sit down. And the one thing that they really wanted us to learn was that you have to be good with tolerating ambiguity because you will be in situations that are spectacularly ambiguous in your adopted nation. Things are not going, especially in my case, in Japan, things were really, really ambiguous. Like as a California boy of Mediterranean descent who was very tall and had big shoes and had a large footprint, so to speak. And a guy who did not know, I'd read books, but I couldn't know all of the nuances for all contexts. And there was a lot of ambiguity tolerance. So I like the idea of going to a country where you don't know the mores and you have to tolerate ambiguity. I would love for that to be a thing. You actually talk in the book about, in addition to possibly serving your country in the military, that maybe 2 years of just general service, I think it was 2 years that you suggested as a possibility, would be good. And it would kind of lend itself to what good can I do today? That mindset of leaving the narcissistic tendencies of it's all about me and my number of likes on my Instagram feed, but let's give.
Yes, I love that. I don't know, 2 years, it could be 6 months, it could be a month, whatever it takes. I talk about what binds a country together. What is the glue? And there can be different aspects to it. Some aspects I think are terrible. Some are about ethnicity, like we all have to have the same ethnicity. That, I think, as we've seen through history, is a terrible way to keep a country glued together because it leads to tragedies. But another way would be to have people all participate in some sort of national service. And it does, as you say, not the army, but something more like AmeriCorps, or just spending 6 months digging ditches or tutoring kids, something along those lines, I think could be very helpful in providing a glue because we really do need a glue. I mean, I feel that we're becoming unglued because people have such different experiences and such different realities. So let's find a way to get all of the people invested and doing good for our country.
To that end, I'm going to ask you my final question. And AJ, it is this, you've heard me ask the miracle question of what insight or skill would you like if you had the power to confer upon all humans, what would that be? I'm going to ask you it a little bit differently though today. Based on your experience with the Constitution, if you had the magical powers to confer upon all humanity, one insight or skill that would dramatically improve the lives of the individuals and perhaps society at large, since we are all connected, to borrow, I believe, something that Benjamin Franklin once said, not to lead the witness here, we must hang together or all hang separately.
Right.
What would be your wish to...
Oh, that's great. I love what you mentioned earlier about seeing the world as a puzzle instead of a problem. But I'm going to follow the lead because I do think we have to focus on what we have in common as humans, as opposed to focusing on our differences. And we do have more in common than we have differences. I mean, genetically, as sentient beings, we all use language. We all are trying to reduce suffering and increase happiness. So yeah, let's focus on that. And whether that's on a country level or a world level, I do feel after this more optimistic. I feel these are tough times. These are very tough times. Times that try men's souls, to use a colonial phrase. But I do feel more optimistic after this experiment that if we commit to it, we can focus on the good parts of the Constitution and saving democracy and making the Constitution live up to its amazing promises of equality and liberty and general welfare for all. So that's what I took away. And I hope if people read the book that they will feel more empowered and maybe more optimistic at the end.
Well, you know, in your book, and I'm going to close with this idea, you describe a picture of a sun, and it could either be a setting sun or a rising sun. And it really kind of, once again, it depends on who's looking at it, and depends maybe when they're looking at it. And you're describing a rising sun in terms of that perspective. Interestingly, that's the same thing I chose for the cover of my book, was a rising sun. So, my goodness,
Which,
AJ,
by the way, I am so honored that I got to write the foreword for Adams. I hate to bring it up at the last moment, but he has an awesome book coming out. And I am so flattered that I was able to write the foreword for that.
Oh my gosh. And I wasn't looking for a plug, but thank you for it nonetheless. AJ, I can't even describe to you the levels, like you hit maximum joy. You elicit from me what feels like a maximum of joy. I just can't even describe how much I love being with you, man.
Well, it is mutual. I just have a great time talking. So let's do it again. I'm up for number 6 whenever you want.
6 and a cigar and a bathrobe.
Exactly. I'm waiting.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to SuperPsyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.